A little bit about me. In addition to being an editor, as I mentioned, I'm a workflow consultant. I create databases for editorial and consumer show functions to help manage the process of that. I do a lot of volunteer work for Magazines Canada. I'm on the board of the Canadian Society of Magazine Editors. So if anyone comes to the Magnet conference in June, I'll see you there. And tablets, my whole mind right now and so forth is embracing these enhanced tablet editions. So that's kind of added to that layer of assignment letters in terms of trying to create assignments that may incorporate ideas for tablet enhancements to layer onto a print story. So I've learned a lot about that in the last 4 months. So who here is an editor? Okay, lots of editors. Okay, any publishers in the room? Nope. Art directors? Nope. Okay, who here normally would write an assignment letter? Okay, great, a lot of you. And who here has a contributor's contract? Okay, who considers their assignment letter to be their contract? Who doesn't normally write assignment letters or contracts? No one wants to admit it. Yeah, sort of. Okay, great. And yeah, so let's see what's next. So we'll go through why assignment letters are helpful, why taking the time to write one can actually save time, when you should write them, what should it include, how assignment letters and contracts differ, what should be in your contract, and who should sign the contract and how often. So it's very nuts and bolts. We'll just go through, and I hope there's a lot of helpful tips. And if you have questions or you have helpful tips that you want to share with the crowd, this is a place we can all learn. So assignment letters are helpful because they are an agreement in writing. So assignment letters should be written for every assignment. And I know a lot of people think, okay, well, I've worked with this person before, or we always just talk over the phone, or whatever. But to me, in order to set the expectation for the writer that what you want is here, and not kind of here, you need to lay out for them as much as you can in writing and be very specific. Tell them everything that you want. Tell them what's flexible. Share as much as you can, and just make that expectation level really high. My partner always says, you never take your car in to get fixed dirty. You always clean up your car before you take it to the mechanic. That's because you don't want them to think you don't really care about your car. If you clean everything all up and you set that expectation that you're expecting a very good experience from the writer, you're going to get that. And then, conversely, from a writer's point of view, approaching an assignment request, approaching a query letter by writing things in a most professional manner, by always being businesslike, by being really complete and open and relaxed and following up and that kind of thing, is just setting that expectation that this is a business relationship that we're both going to contribute to in a business-like manner. I think that would go without saying, but I know sometimes those relationships can get emotional because they're about money and they're about control of creative freedom. So, but in my experience, the more relaxed and unemotional things are, the better they can work, and the more likely that both parties will work together again and again as a partnership. So I'll go through specific line by line with an assignment letter, what my experience shows that is best to include. But it's also important in an assignment letter to talk about what you don't want. So I've had to say many times in terms of sources, like if you prefer that a certain interviewee not be approached, you should also lay out that sort of thing. So sometimes certain interviewees get called on over and over again by magazines because they know a lot about like child psychology or something like that. But it's in order to be fresh and timely and relevant to the audience, sometimes you have to push writers to go out and find new sources. And as a writer, if you're going to talk about approaching a celebrity or approaching some sort of difficult to reach source, like a surgeon with a specific specialty who's really busy, as a writer, you need to show that you're capable of connecting with that source. I talk about something called risk profile, where as a writer, the best thing that you can do to get an assignment, particularly with a brand that you haven't ever worked with before, is to show yourself to be really low risk. So you can absolutely deliver that story on time, on topic. You will be able to access the sources. You've written for other publications before, and you have had a business-like, easygoing relationship with that brand. You can absolutely be relied upon to update stories if there's been a lag in production or print. You were there as a partner from the very beginning to the end of the process. And if you can demonstrate that, you can show that you're low risk profile. You're very likely to get an assignment. If there's a concern that I'm not sure if I don't know this person, maybe they're not going to be able to deliver. It sounds like they've got really lofty expectations of how they're going to deliver the story. I don't know. I'm afraid that it's not going to work out. I'm going to end up having to scramble to come up with some other content. I don't have the money to replace the story. If as a writer, if you sort of set up any of those concerns in an editor's mind, you're less likely to get the assignment. Once you break through and you've had one assignment or some good conversations with that editor, you're much more likely to get those assignments more easily. So I'm sure many of you in the room have experienced that, where it's just a sort of a snowball effect. When you first start, it's really hard to get assignments, and then as you break into it, you can. A friend of mine is a really experienced writer and writes for Toronto Life all the time. He moved to California. He can barely get assignments writing for the newspapers down there. It's just really, really difficult for him to break in because he has no profile. He's high risk for them. And so he's doing some amazing work for the newspapers. But slowly breaking into the market after 2 years of living there. So I know it's hard, but a lot of those conversations that you have as a follow-up call to a query letter can help reduce that risk profile, and you can explore, now that you've shown that you're prepared to do some work up front and prepared to nurture that relationship, you can ask what other types of content that magazine is looking for and find out more about what their needs are. And from the editor side of the desk, as you receive quality query letters or you have really good working relationships with those freelancers, you can then start cluing them into where your real needs are and what your themes are coming up and that kind of thing. So they can start thinking ahead for you and help bring you those really, really great ideas. So again, assignment letters are also helpful because they are documenting. So if people leave, if they're sick, whatever it is, I believe in sharing and communication. So I believe in putting assignment letters on a shared server or some other place where other people can access them. So if someone else needs to edit the copy, it's really clear what the copy should be about. Any details on fees and deadlines are there for others to access. It's just basic stuff, but a lot of times I think assignment letters are kept on personal hard drives, and if someone backs over your computer and you're sick, well, it's pretty hard to figure out what to do. In terms of writing assignment letters, how they can save time, definitely being really specific can get you specific results. So often I think story ideas come from like an anecdote that you've heard or a piece of research that you've read or research that you've pulled up from a reader survey or PMB results. You find out that your reader has a certain need or there's something that would affect her life, and you figure out, okay, how am I going to develop a story idea for this readership that really makes sense? But when you're writing your assignment letter, you want to include all those original ideas and sources of those ideas and really spell out how you want them applied. If you leave things to the writer's imagination, they may deliver something totally different and not what you're expecting, and then you'll have to decide if that's what you want, and then if it's not, then you're asking them to do a second draft or a third draft just because you didn't actually communicate what it was you were hoping for. I would always say that you would tell the writer that if they've come up with something else in their research, then you're open to changes, absolutely. But this is what you're hoping for. So if you find out something else, let's chat and we'll amend the assignment letter if needed. We'll actually go that trouble of changing the assignment letter if you're going to deliver something different. But let's know what that's going to be before it just shows up on my desk. And definitely an assignment letter is your checklist for your substantive edit. There aren't a lot of places to learn how to do a substantive edit, and I think that those people who are really talented at substantive editing are really, really valuable team members, because in the end, a quality read, a really well organized and thoughtful read is what the reader is after. And that person on staff who really knows how to set up a whole story is super valuable. And but for others who are learning the process particularly, I think an assignment letter is like your checklist, and you go through it and you just go through the manuscript and you can literally say, is this in the story? Yes. Is this in the story? Yes. Is this in the story? No. Okay, fix note. That's not in the story. Is this in the story? And then you just kind of go through and use it as your sort of contract about what you're expecting in that story. And to me, that's really valuable. And again, like if you take the time to write out specifics about what you're expecting, it's kind of like your checklist for your substantive edit. So you're almost writing the assignment letter for yourself in some way. So it's selfish. As I mentioned, sometimes you want to spec out what sources you don't want included, but also certain story arguments. So there may be a certain point of view that that the writer is just going to reflexively think, oh, okay, this is something I should definitely talk about. But that you've talked about it in the magazine several other times, and you want them to go a step further or in a different manner. You need to specify that as well. So sometimes an assignment letter is not just what to do, but what not to do. And definitely, sorry, typo, a document to protect you. There, never happened. It's a document to protect you if a story needs major fixes or needs to be killed. So if you've just had a verbal talk with someone about what the story should be about and you haven't written it out, and then they deliver something totally different, you can't prove that, right? You can't prove it, and it doesn't allow you to say, well, this is a really interesting story, but I asked for this. You delivered that. I need you to make what I asked for. Thank you very much. If you're just going by a verbal, it's like, well, I think I said this, and you end up having a lot more confusion about it, and you don't have any sort of document to protect yourself. So in this case of a kill fee, sometimes you need to get someone higher up in the management hierarchy involved too to authorize a kill fee. Where you pay. I'm thinking of the case of where a story isn't delivered and you have no confidence that could ever be delivered the way that you want. Usually you would pay a kill fee of like 10 to 50%, depending on what you set out and what you agreed to in advance. We'll talk about that at the contract stage of things. But you need the assignment letter to protect you, to show that you asked for this and this was delivered. It's totally wrong. And I've asked for it a couple of other times. We've gone through some drafts. It's not happening. I'm just never going to get this. And what was delivered isn't working for us. It's not right for the brand, or it's just not together. So, it protects you against needing authorization for a kill fee. Certainly in my experience, where kill fees, where you can't publish the story, but it's not the writer's fault, usually that's just full payment in my experience, in case that question comes up. Did you have a... I would normally explain why, if not listed in the assignment letter along with just the person's name, then over the phone, just so that they understand the reason for that. And it's not that you want to say, I think you're lazy, and that you're going to just interview the same person that wrote, that was interviewed in our competitor last month because you read that story and there's the name and how convenient. No, it's not. It's just like, I think our readership is looking for someone a little bit more or whatever, or this person's had so much airplay already, we really need to do something fresh. I don't think it needs to be a long explanation. So, when should you write an assignment letter? In my experience, we actually start with something like an assignment letter internally. So when a story idea is someone on staff's rather than a query letter, we would start with something called a concept document. And a concept document lays out story focus, why. So in story focus is, I learned from Kathy Elliott, who's a great editor that I've worked with. She uses the phrase, "This story will show that," ... And you need to complete the sentence. You only get one sentence, and you don't get multiple clauses. You have to complete it. This story will show that, let's see, non-allergenic cats can still irritate people with skin allergies, or whatever it is. There's going to be some really specific point that you are going to prove, and it has to be explained in one sentence. Every story, no matter whether it's like a 36-page feature, as was mentioned at lunchtime, or a sidebar, needs to have a point. It doesn't matter how narrative and long form it is, or how service and short it is, it needs to have a point. One single point that it's going to prove. And so that's the first thing that you need to identify when you have an idea. If you start to say this story is about, then that's wrong. About could be a lot of things. About isn't a story thesis. About is not a point to prove. Otherwise, my story is just about cats, not about allergenic cats or non-allergenic cats that could do something. So I think whenever I receive a query letter, same thing. I'm always challenging that query with, well, what is your story going to show? What point it will it prove? I really can't process your idea or deal with it or bring it to my editorial group until I have that information in hand. Thanks for the query. Let me know when you got that. So it's a bit, and because I don't want to do that work. I don't want to imagine what it will do. I just want to put that back to the writer. So again, as writers, if you can develop your story and establish that point and make that very clear at the top of your query letter, perhaps after showing a bit of a hook, you're going to communicate that you really know what it is that you're going to write about, and that's flexible if someone wants something slightly different, but you have a plan. So the concept document would contain that phrase, "This story will show that," and it would also talk about, why is this story right for our brand, not another brand? And it's a good test to think about a competitor and say, could this story be written for the competitor? If the answer is yes, then unless you have a really, really close competitor from a brand point of view, you should think about, well, what would we do to make it uniquely appropriate for our audience? And that could be a case of which interviewees to use, or it could be sort of a focus thing, or it could be the way that you package it visually, but you should be able to say, why is it right for our brand? So those are some of the things that should go into a concept document, and then the rest of it is very similar to an assignment letter, and I'll, as I say, go through that line by line, but you should take that to your story meeting and get feedback and approval on that, and then use that concept document and just rework it and add to it to create your assignment letter. So when you finalize that assignment letter with and offer it to a writer, you're offering it with deadlines, and you're offering it with fees in mind and sort of research scopes. They can kind of think about, like, okay, how much time is this really going to take? And that allows them to decide whether they think the assignment is fair and appropriate for them, something they can take on. And at that point, it's good to say, look, I'm open to this assignment letter is still flexible. Is there anything you want to change? Is there anything that you think is too ambitious? Anything you want to add? And it's good just to be very, very open and fair at that point, because they might say, you know what? I think like five ways to do this is too many. I'm never going to be able to write 5 ways to do something in 500 words. It's just, I'm going to write an intro. I'm going to do a little sidebar as you've asked. I don't think I can make that word count work for that. It's just good to say this is a flexible document right now. Let's talk about it, and then we'll amend it and then solidify it before you accept it. So news magazines, in order to make the the document work for different types of workflows. Definitely working from a template can help you do things more quickly, and just focusing on a thesis and key questions is really good for a news title. So what exactly should an assignment letter include? So as I've noted, the thesis point can never be overlooked. That's the most important thing. I like to list the main stories that, the main questions that a story should answer. Somewhere between 3 and 10 key points, and they can be sort of general, specific, but they should you should explore what really should the story answer for the reader, and that often involves a little bit of research. You might need to find out a little bit more. This is a way I really like to use interns. I like to ask, okay, here's sort of an idea that I have. I'm not sure if this is a viable story. I'm thinking about assigning it soon. Can you go out and help me learn a bit about that and present to me some of the key points on this topic, so then I can think, okay, how can we go a little bit further than the general research that's out there? Now that we know what the reader can access in the general world, what would we ask experts to go that step beyond that basic research package that anyone could look up? And what should we ask of those experts? So making that list as part of your assignment letter just tells the writer exactly what you want answered. And then, of course, you want to talk about structure. So as I mentioned in the workflow session this morning, involving your art department at this time could be really helpful, because you might say, I've got an idea for a 2,500 word story that will cover these sorts of areas, and they might say to you, you know what, that section that you're talking about should really be a flowchart. And then it's like a decision tree or something that helps the reader think through a process and come up with the right answer for her, rather than just trying to describe this as prose. So you should ask your writer to create a flowchart, and we will design it, or there may be some other structure or idea that the art department can use. If not, the art department is great to involve at this point, because they can start thinking about other visuals as well. But structure, do you want your piece set up as a myth versus fact piece with a lot of subheads? Do you want it to open with like personal anecdotes and then go into some expert material and then resolve the personal crisis? Do you want it to be a quiz? Do you want it to be in short subheaded pieces with bulleted elements? Like, how do you want that set up? What is your suggestion? And the more like narrative and storytelling the piece is, the less you want to dictate, because the story will dictate that flow to some extent. But in a lot of service pieces, you might want to be quite specific, because you'll know how you've done this type of story before and what's worked and what hasn't, or you'll have an inspiration from some other brand that you're reading, and you might as well get them to structure it the way you want, rather than you having to create that structure from whatever was submitted. Saves you time, saves the writer time, respects their time, that kind of thing. Same thing from a query point of view. It's worth mentioning a structure that you might employ. I would suggest, though, that you can you hear me at the back better now? I would suggest that as a writer, if you are offering a story idea, that you mention potential structures that you could use, but you should look at the brand that you're hoping to write for, and see how they've structured things in the past, because that's a really good predictor of what they like to do and what they think is right for their audience. So we've talked about what makes a story right for the magazine, but also the timely element. So, why is it perfect for us, and why now? And that's a definite test that I always have for query letters. Someone might say, I think we should do a beautiful piece on handwriting analysis. Like, that sounds lovely. Why now? Why now? Is there some piece in the news about someone forging handwriting, or, like what trend or timely event could we tie it to? If there's nothing, then it's sort of like, if there isn't a reason for us to do it now, then is there a reason for us to do it ever? Sort of the challenge that I would put back to the writer and say, I don't, we could run this anytime, so therefore, maybe it's right for the web if it's something that people are really interested in and would search for continually. It's just evergreen content like that, but the why no factor totally has to be there. In terms of sources, we talked about that in terms of experts, but also I like to say what experts might be interviewed, but also how many real people and what types of real people are you looking for. Of course, some of the national magazines coming out of Toronto have the bad habit of interviewing a lot of people from Ontario. So, a lot of time we would actually specify an assignment letter, try to make sure you have some representation from across the country so that's been put in the assignment letter, because it makes, of course, we should always talk to people from across the country, but if we don't specify that, we may not get it. So let's see. And then in terms of voice and tone and attitude, people new to the brand, a writer new to the brand may not really know the brand voice that well, and it can be helpful to say, we like to keep it light and humorous and cheeky, or, we're like your best friend and someone who's giving you, just leveling with you and giving you the goods, or, we're that authoritative expert that you can really trust. You need to explain who that voice is and what tone should be used in that piece, because certainly the type of humor that's right for Esquire is not right for Canadian Living, And then it's helpful if you have an idea of the cover lines. It's great to include that, because if you've already been able to focus the story in your mind to what the cover promise is going to be, that's certainly going to focus the writer's concept, because you obviously want to develop cover lines that don't overpromise, that are clear. And if you can communicate that, then that helps them know what they're going for. And then, of course, the working title, that's kind of like internally what you think the story really is. And that might change, but it does help. And then, of course, platform. Are you asking them to do the story just for print? Is it just for web? Is it a story that you want them to deliver in two ways? So 2 manuscripts, one for print, one for web. How is it reworked for one or the other? Is it a print story that explains, superfoods and how they work in your body, and then you need an accompanying slideshow of like 10 superfoods with pictures and 10 little 1-paragraph points that are included in the slideshow? Just what exactly do you want for each platform? And now with tablet enhancements, do you want to ask for additional material for that? So do you want image sourcing beyond what would be used in print, so you can do a slideshow on your enhanced tablet edition? Do you want to capture part of an interview as an audio file so you can have it playable from your tablet edition? Should you include source information links so that further reading can be done from the tablet edition? So you just match up those enhancements so that your staff, when they're producing that content for tablet or for web, they don't have to go and find additional things, because the writer would already be consulting those things. They just may not normally include it in their package, maybe in fact checking, but if you say it explicitly, it'll save you time going back to them as well. And then, of course, you want to have your deadline, what issue you're hoping for it to run in, your length, your fee, your kill conditions, and I think I meant fee there. So you're spelling all of that out in advance before you have that conversation and say, do you accept this assignment? Is it something you want to do? Means that the writer can really quantify the amount of time that it's going to take and make sure they feel that they can actually deliver that and it's fair and appropriate for the rate and so forth. So I think sometimes there's the fees are discussed after the fact and it's one big complaint of writers, and they don't often voice that directly to their editor, but as I say, I hear a lot about these sorts of things on one of the lists that I work on, and it can be really confusing for a writer if they kind of think that the level required is here, but the fee is here, and they've got to they're trying to figure out, oh, I shouldn't spend as much time on that as I thought I was going to, but I was excited about the level that piece was at. So as a writer, when you get that fee, sometimes you have to go back and negotiate a little bit and say, I kind of thought that the fee would be at this level based on the work, but I can't deliver in the time that it would take. I can't deliver for that fee. So let's negotiate either money, time, or scope. So maybe can you get someone on staff to provide a research package for me so I have a base of material to start with? Is there someone there that can help with that? Would you consider making that web component that you're asking for as a secondary fee so you can find a reason to get approval for additional amounts? And as editors, I think we have to be open to that. It's something that sometimes writers and editors have a little trouble discussing those fees, but just it's a business. It's a business, and fees should not be set on a per word basis, and that's the end of the story. There's such a gamut out there of writers of various skills. Someone just entering the market should not earn the same as someone who's been on the job for 20 years and has won lots of awards. That doesn't make sense. So that's like expecting the chef at McDonald's to deliver the same thing as the chef at the high-end steak restaurant. It's just not the same. And there's a whole gamut of scope out there. There are pieces that are where it's like one interview and relatively simple, and it's sort of a word rate. But then if you're asking for a package story with lots of charts and elements like that where the word count does not reflect the work, you need to think about that as well. So I hesitate to assign a story on a per word basis. I kind of use that as an initial measuring stick and say, okay, well, if it's $1 a word and it's this many words, okay, like it's 600 words, $600. Okay, now does this make sense? Who am I going to assign it to? Okay, that person really needs $1.20 because of their level of experience, or $1.50 or whatever it is. But I don't, okay, do I have that much money? If I don't, can I do something on that writer's behalf in order to offer it to them so it's a little bit easier to do? Or is there another place I can save money in the magazine? You just kind of have to think through that fee, that person, that scope, and try to make it all fair. And as a writer, you have to think about that too, because as long as people continue to sort of write for less than they think is fair, rates won't go anywhere, right? So we need to make it work on both sides. So upping the ante, how to set those expectations high. Yeah, providing a research package, giving them contact information for sources who you think are really great. Sometimes you'll have that from previous stories where maybe you have an interviewee who's like a breast cancer surgeon or some person who's difficult to access, but from previous fact-checking packages, you actually have their information. Or real people interviewees that someone knows that could work really well, because sometimes it's hard for writers to find those real people. If you can do things that help them along, you do set that expectation level. And as I mentioned, just asking for types of interviewees and where they are. I haven't really been accused of this before, but people do say, I hate getting a huge detailed assignment letter. Sometimes they're longer than the assignment itself, and oh my God, this person's a control freak. Okay, but so I'm maybe a little guilty of that. However, as I say, you can't get what you want if you don't ask for it. The writer profile really can dictate how detailed you need to be. If they're really experienced at delivering fabulous stories that surprise you, then maybe you can back off a little bit with this specificity. If you've worked together before, again, maybe you just need to run through those quick points, what the thesis is, what you wanted to prove, and that's mostly it. But if there is major potential for miscommunication if you don't specify. So I think I err on the side of giving too much. And if the most important thing is that you say, if you come across something else or you want to handle this in a different way as you get into the writing process, let's talk. I'm open to change. But I've told you everything I can think of. And I've honestly had a lot of people, and maybe they're just trying to get more assignments, I don't know. But I've honestly had a lot of people thank me and say, you're one of the only editors who provides a complete assignment letter. And now I know exactly what I need to do. And to me, like when I'm trying to do a new and difficult task, the more I don't know, the harder it is to do that task. It's intimidating. You're not sure how to deliver this when you don't have anything set out. So the more that the writer gets in terms of specifics, the simpler it will seem to just go ahead and deliver exactly what's been asked for. So I think it means that you may not get people procrastinating as much and kind of rushing to the deadline at the end because they have a sort of a set out plan of how to approach everything. So they won't surprise you at the last minute with, I decided to do something totally different. So what's the difference between an assignment letter and a contract? Assignment letter is all about a specific story, and an assignment letter just talks about the parameters of that story and the matching fees and deadlines. Your contract is your ongoing legal rights and usage. So this is where the talk gets really exciting, talk about legal stuff. But it's critical. Right now, we are in a multi-platform environment. We're not really sure how we're going to use content down the road, particularly for lifestyle brands who, those staffs that need to look at how to use content over and over time. You want to make sure that you're free and clear to use that content later. It can be really difficult. I mean, if you have the capacity to, on a case-by-case basis, reapproach people and say, I'd like to use your work again in this manner, can we renegotiate that? And you're stepping through that over and over again. If you can handle that, fantastic. But a lot of people have trouble going through that whole layer of administration. So you might want to ask for the rights that you want up front. And that way you're going to get that agreement on the initial assignment, and then you know how you can use that work. And then you just need to classify your work as you finish it up over, like by what rights you have, so that you know in the future what you can access. And there's a lot of new contracts coming out right now that do ask for a lot more in the way of rights. And it kind of has to be a negotiation again of what rate is appropriate for what rights being asked. In the past, there were lots of if we use this on the web, then we'll add another 5% or, that kind of thing. But I think, again, just because we're wanting to use this material in lots of different ways, either you need to have an opt-in clause, or you need to just buy the rights you want at the beginning and pay up front for those. So a contract should include what it is that you want to buy, how long you want to buy it for, how long you would like to use it, what you'll pay for additional usage, whether you'll archive the work, whether the writer can include that work in their portfolio, and if when, at what point. Because sometimes, with the web, a writer could put the story up before you even publish it, and it's just as searchable and findable as it will be on your own website. So that can be a bit problematic. If there's an exclusivity or blackout period, so you can resell this work after 18 months or 2 years or never. And definitely it'd be good to have your contract reviewed by a lawyer to make sure that you're not asking for anything that runs afoul of copyright law and so forth, because that'll just make it messy later on. So who should sign your contract? Definitely all of your writers, your photographers, illustrators, recipe developers, stylists, all of those people who contribute anything that could be reused. Usually what's not included is what's bundled inside of photo shoots, prop stylists and hair and makeup stylists, and those sorts of folks don't usually need to sign a contract unless for auditing purposes they just need to sign a contract that says they agree to work for a certain rate. But real people, or people who are allowing you to use their home, should definitely sign a photo release type contract that just says that they agree that their image may be used and how. It's not uncommon for decor type magazines to want to produce special interest publications, SIPs or books, and that real person, homeowner, may not have thought that they would appear 3 years later in another product. So you want to sort of give them a heads up on that by asking them to sign the release, and that way, if they come back with any concerns about that, you've got a document that shows that was okay with them. It's usually just a matter of communication, as long as they know it's going to happen. But what's happening now in some places is we're buying rights outright for all media being produced. So in that case, a real person who was interviewed for a story, maybe about their health, where it's a sensitive issue or something like that, could be sort of, she's in a photo shoot, there's a lovely background, she looks great, and then that photo becomes the property of the publisher. Well, if in a few years someone's just looking for a picture of a person beside a tree, they'll go, oh, look at that great photo, we could reuse it. It's contextless, it's not immersed in the story anymore. But meanwhile, that person is like an ovarian cancer survivor. You don't want to see, if you're that person, you don't want to see your picture associated with something completely unrelated to the story, right? So